we have a moral duty
Yeah.
as Americans to ensure that where our taxpayer dollars go, there are not horrific things being done with them. We have a moral obligation as Americans to demand all of the Epstein evidence. I want to know that we're not paying for a pederast ring. I want to know that the American taxpayer dollars are not going to fund and support and to protect people that were involved in the world's most evil pederast ring that we know of right now. Like, I have a right, damn it, as an American to know that.
Yeah.
So give us the files, obviously. You know, and there were a lot of Israeli leaders. Ehud Barak was one of them, some Mossad agents. We're now learning a lot of deals that Epstein was doing with the nation of Israel. Yes, of course you can criticize that. Yes, obviously. That doesn't make you anti-Semitic to say that Jeffrey Epstein negotiating a bunch of security deals on behalf of the nation state of Israel seems extremely suspect. If he's not somebody
what is your view, Benny, of Nick Fuentes, given his rising influence and given he's sort of become central to the debate about where the right should go in America? What is your view of him?
Yeah, so we're in this country, I know there's other countries that have different opinions, but in this country, we are given by God a right to free speech, thought, and association. We're also given by God the ability to peacefully disagree with each other. And I know that you've offered to interview Nick Fuentes.
Well, I've been thinking about it. I mean, I had a view before not to, and then I watched the interview that Tucker did with him. And I just thought if I was to do one, I'd probably do it a different way to the way Tucker did. My only argument, I totally subscribe to Tucker's view. He can interview who the hell he likes and do it how the hell he likes. I was just struck that he was a bit tougher with me, Tucker, than he was with Fuentes. So I would certainly go harder with Fuentes. But I do think this argument of not platforming people, with very, very, very small number of exceptions, I do think, generally speaking, you should platform people, and then it's down to you to interview them in a way that adds to public discourse and doesn't look like it's just part of their PR machine. That would be my argument.
It's a pressure release valve in society. And that's how it's always gone. And that's how the good ideas rise to the top and the bad ideas fall to the bottom of the barrel. And inside of societies that don't have that pressure release valve, you don't want to see, in fact, you do see the darkness and the evil that arises in those societies when it's like, shut up, shut up, shut up, we'll put you in jail for thinking that, right? That's actually the way to guarantee that things become more radical. And we've built in freedom of speech. We have something called the Bill of Rights here in America. I know this is going to be very painful for you. a lot of them were based, frankly, on John Locke and a lot of great British thinkers, Magna Carta and so on. But, freedom of speech is right up there at the very tip top. And so I believe, no, I don't believe or deplatforming.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. And actually, I wish we had your First Amendment in my country and it would stop us arresting comedians at airports with 5 armed police officers for making jokes that some people found inappropriate.
Donald Trump just said this. Piers, he was asked about that, Nick Fuentes and Tucker. And Trump's like, wait a second, I thought we had free speech in this country. Tucker does things, I agree with him. Tucker does things, I disagree with him. Like, what is that? That's like, that's human life. That's the way that the world works. And if I may add just one final thing, Piers, to this conversation, because I think it's critical in this moment, where you don't want to just witness months ago precisely what happens when you stop having things, and when people pick up guns, and they do truly ugly and evil things. Charlie Kirk is sitting there on a college campus wanting to debate. Is he going to debate a Groyper? Is he going to debate some trans activist, that pees in a kitty litter box? Like, who knows? It could be anyone. But he's there, and he's asking people that disagree with him. I'm not sure how familiar you are with Charlie's game.
Not very.
He asked people who disagreed with him to come to the front of the line.
Yes.
So that he could lower the temperature. And a lot of it never devolved into screaming. It never devolved into Charlie throwing the mic, and hitting him in the head. That never happened. In fact, the vast majority of these, I went to these events, the individuals who disagreed with Charlie at the very least felt respected. Like they got a chance to say their piece.
I totally
and they probably
agree.
felt They probably felt good walking away.
Yeah.
Even if they got roasted by Charlie, they probably felt good because they're like, yo, I got to like say my thing. And then most of them were wrong in their thing, you know, or I disagree with their thing. That's my right, by the way, as an American. But what you can't have in this country is like the ultimate cancellation, which is I'll shoot you and kill you, right, for what you believe. I was just to murder you, right, for what you believe. And you get that by not having to be.
Yeah, and actually, as I've been saying, as I promoted my book, this is the weird thing about the progressive woke left, is that in the end, they began to behave like the very fascists they profess to hate most. And you couldn't be a purer personification of that than what happened to Charlie Kirk, where he was literally shot dead for his speech. That is what happens in a genuine fascist state. And yet it's the progressive left that was cheering that on. The number of people I saw on TikTok afterwards, doctors, teachers, professors, it was insane, celebrating his death. It's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Right? And then you remember, these are people identifying as liberals. You're not liberals, you're fascists. If you celebrate a man's murder for his speech, you are a fascist.
Let me just, sorry, I'm gonna Bigfoot you on your own program, Piers. I'm known for doing this. Well done. On your woke book, man. Woke is dead. You've been on a barn burner, bro. It's a critical book at this time. I think it has to do with some of what we're gonna talk about today, frankly.
Yeah. No, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, what you're really seeing is a changing of the guard, right? When it comes to power politics.
Yeah.
And so woke is truly dead. Is it going to be replaced by some type of Frankenstein's monster of left-wing communism that, who knows, is it even worse? Or is it going to be replaced by MAGA?
You know, what's really interesting about the woke ideology and the way I do believe that fundamentally it's dead is just a lot of the people who still espouse it haven't got the memo. The vast majority of the general public around the world have had enough of it. But what was interesting was, you know, people, if you look at people like me or Bill Maher or Joe Rogan or Elon Musk or RFK, or there's a lot of people who wouldn't have identified as conservative right at all. In fact, if you'd asked us a few years ago, would have identified as liberals, right? But have absolutely nothing in common with an ideology which fundamentally, to me, is the opposite of liberalism. So that was what made it interesting to me, is it became something where you and I could have regular debates, for example, where we would agree about whatever the particular issue was, because it normally involved, in the last few years, completely insane behavior by the progressive left.
Yes. And now you got something on me, Piers, and I just can't stand it. You can say, I wrote the book. Shut up, Benny. I wrote the book on it. Shut up, Benny. I wrote the book on it. And you can say that. And that's just I don't know what happens in England, but that's a deal killer over here in America. If you can say that at family dinner, boy, you're cooked. You're done. You know,
well,
you gotta hang it up.
I appreciate finally getting one over you.
That's right. I thought I was the one who killed woke, Piers. Son of a bitch.
You were definitely party to it. Don't you worry. We can share the assassin's blade about an ideology that was so disastrous. Benny, great as always. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. I appreciate it.
God bless you, Piers. I'm just so happy to have gotten one F-bomb. I will pin this on my wall as like a career highlight to get the F-bomb. The only bomb that I want to have America be dropping around the world will be with Morgan F.
Benny, good to talk to you. All the best.
Godspeed.
Well, joining me now is Stephen Crowder, the host of Louder with Crowder. Stephen, great to have you on our set. I imagine you probably were nodding away, certainly for the last bit of that conversation I had with Benny Johnson. But there are real issues going on with the conservative right in America. And it seems to me the timing of all this is not unconnected to the fact that we're soon to be heading into midterm year, and then after that into general election mayhem for 2 more years. It is the beginning of the end of Donald Trump as President of the United States, assuming he doesn't try and uproot everything and run for a 3rd term, which I don't think he will. And what you might be seeing now is a kind of battle for the heart and soul of where the conservative right in America goes post-Trump. Now, am I right? Am I wrong? What's your view?
Well, thanks for having me. I think you're right. And I think, look, and I know I just saw the tail end of Benny. We all know that we have the First Amendment. We all know that we have freedom of speech in the country. I don't think that's what we're discussing here. Like you said, we're discussing the future of this country. And there are some rifts on the right, but I want to be clear, there's far more of some civil fracturing on the left than on the right. The through line isn't really just someone's extreme or someone's old guard. The through line is clickbait. The through line is you have a lot of people who have taken both sides of every issue so that they're kind of on, they kind of can't be attacked, and your position is indefensible. What I would like to focus on is a prescription for people at home where they know how they can filter through people and these commentators out there and maybe people they can trust. It's 5 points. I think, one, people need to ask themselves if we agree the woke left is a threat, because this is very important. They're still out there. They just killed one of our friends, and in doing this, changed my minds on campus just 2 weeks ago at Oklahoma University. I had to be escorted in an armed vehicle 3 times because of threats, close calls. They're basically on their deathbed, figuratively, everyone, just to be clear. And instead of finishing it, the right now is deciding to infight. So number one, people need to look at this commentator, whoever it is, whether it's Ben Shapiro or Nick Fuentes, whether it's someone at Daily Wire or Tucker Carlson, and say, this commentator, this host, what have they done to fight the left? We have clear examples with Scott Presler, with people like Charlie Kirk, people who've actually made a difference. What kind of coalition can they build without compromising fundamentals? Let me explain to give you a really clear answer. Israel. I don't think it's as big of a wedge issue with the half that elects presidents as people think. My position, said it to Ben Shapiro over a decade ago. Defund all sides of that war. Okay, we shouldn't be sending money to Israel, nor should we be sending it to Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon. Here's the thing. That's a very reasonable position that many Americans hold, and even my Jewish friends have no problem with it. Can the people out there, these commentators, build a coalition with that? If not, they're not actually looking to build a future for the country. Let's take H-1Bs as an example. Ben Shapiro out there defending it. I cannot imagine how anyone could defend this at this point when 80% of the program is antithetical to the reason of the program because they're being put into junior positions. We need to do away with it. Can the people, the old guard, can they build a coalition with that? And finally, will these people show up to defend their viewpoint in hostile territory? I can tell you this, I've extended an invitation to Ben Shapiro, to Mark Levin, to Tucker Carlson, to Candace Owens, to Nick Fuentes, and I've heard every kind of response out there except I accept those words. So I don't know what happened to the anyone, anytime. I would platform Mao if he was alive today. Doesn't mean I would agree with him. If Xi Jinping said, hey, you know what, I want to have a chat, I'd make really clear where I line up. Sure, we have freedom of speech, but we do have to decide where we want to move forward as a country, and if we get rid of Donald Trump, who's very flawed, who's made some missteps, we can talk about that. Who are we going to replace him with? Because now people are going after J.D. Vance. Do we just want to serve leftist masters? Because I will tell you this, I'm an extremist on that. I think that modern-day leftism is a death cult. And if you're serving them by fracturing the right, then you're just going to die. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to die. I think there's still some wins to be had.
Do you think Marjorie Taylor Greene is a traitor, as Donald Trump has called her?
Well, that's exactly what... Which Marjorie Taylor Greene am I talking to? Am I talking to the one who said, you know, we can't deport people because it would hurt my construction company? Or am I talking to the Marjorie... And I disagree with that. I think it's antithetical to MAGA. Or am I talking to the Marjorie Taylor Greene who said, we need to do away with H-1Bs, which, by the way, I agree with. The only common thread I can see between them is that you're very unlikely to have Indian H-1Bs in your construction company because they're a physically feeble people. So, which Marjorie Taylor Greene am I talking with? Which Tucker Carlson am I talking with? Which Ben Shapiro am I talking with? The one who said lockdowns are bad, or the one who said that anyone not getting a vaccine is an idiot? The through line here is not extreme points of view. The through line is people pursuing clicks at the cost of the future of this country. And I will platform anyone so that I can't answer these questions as far as their views because I don't know them. For example, Nick Fuentes, you talked about his interview with Tucker. Now, I want to be clear. Him saying, I love Stalin, he could have meant, I'm fascinated with Stalin. There's nothing wrong with that, because you know who else is? This guy. I've been doing a deep dive on Stalin and Trotsky and this sort of infighting that was taking place between them. By the way, spoiler alert, I can summarize it. 2 assholes fighting. There's nothing wrong with being fascinated, and I'm not saying Tucker should follow up because it's despicable, because it's ridiculous. Because I'm curious, and sometimes I'm wondering where the curiosity goes when you have someone throw down some wolf bait like that. Well, you love Stalin? What do you mean? You mean you're fascinated how he was able to manipulate people? You mean all the people that he killed? You mean studying him to make sure we avoid it in the future? Or do you mean that he had some cool threads and smoked some cool pipes? I don't know the answer because a lot of these people out there, both the old guard Republicans, who rightfully people have a problem with them, and this sort of new group of people, they're not actually communicating. And they'll say that they'll have these conversations, but in my experience, they very rarely will. And I have a track record of wanting to make that happen. So again, I extend the invitation, and I hope that you do too, Pierce. I hope you have Nick on. and then send him my way next.
I actually am moving to inviting him on. Because I think there comes a point where you can't ignore somebody's rising influence. He is getting talked about so much right now that he's exuding an influence over people. You know, I had the same argument really with someone like Andrew Tate, who I've had on a few times. I think it's important when someone has a big following and are saying whatever they want to say unchallenged, that they come on to somewhere like here, where I don't come at things from a partisan political ideology, and I challenge everybody, right? And I think that's actually a valuable exercise in public discourse. We don't live in the old days where people only had mainstream media outlets to do this stuff. You know, people online now can have exponentially higher audiences, like Fuentes. And as their influence rises, so, in my opinion, does the legitimacy of talking to them and finding out what they really believe in. You know, I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. When he's on record as saying he loves Hitler, what does he mean? If he genuinely... If he genuinely loves Adolf Hitler, the bloke's a fucking idiot, right? But if he's talking about, as you put it, as you framed it, about what he may have been intimate, I don't know. But I'd be interested in having that conversation. In the same way that when I have Tate on, I agree with some things Tate says, but I hammer him over his obvious misogyny. I think the two, you know, someone can be right and wrong about two things, right? Even Churchill, my great hero, wasn't right about everything. If I was interviewing him, I would find some things to criticize Winston Churchill about, right? It doesn't mean to say I think he's a bad guy. I think he's an absolute hero, my all-time hero. However, everybody is flawed, right?
Right. Yeah, and plus if you were interviewing Churchill, he'd probably be drunk, and you'd go, oh, well, I guess that's true. No one is perfect, but I will say, look, we need to be able to have these conversations about this witness. These do matter. What have they done to defeat Russia? What have they done to defeat Russia? Can they build a coalition? Something else that I think is very important. Can these people, whether it's mentioned, whether it's people say they're funded by Qatar, as other people say, you're a Zionist shill, when they take opinions at face value, when they take a disagreement about majority, you're paid by Israel. Not one dime from a foreign nation. I own everything about this company. I've been here since 2009 with a blue bed sheet when there was no money out there. If people say you're paid by X, in my experience, those are usually the folks with something to hide, something else too. I would call and I would ask you to do this. Everyone out there, be transparent with your references, with your sourcing. We provide a bibliography every day. I know it's a lot more work, but you'll have a lot of people who say, I claim this and take my word for it. We don't do that. So if you put people through this filter, and then you have to ask, what's the end game for this country? If we want to do away with Donald Trump, because by the way, 600,000 Chinese students, why? Uncapped H-1Bs, why? It's asinine. Pam Bondi with the Epstein files, there's a reason that I'm not a fan of hers. There's a reason I never covered her confirmation, namely she's an idiot, but she has no idea what she's doing. These are legitimate grievances. But then to go after J.D. Vance and say we're going to throw away our MAGA hat, here's the thing. You can do that online. It's not going to be the half of this country that elects presidents. These people, though, Pierce, I do need to tell you, people like Nick Fuentes, they have a legitimate grievance. There was some gatekeeping going on. And I've experienced this too, by the way. It wasn't over the Israel thing. But you have some conservatives who are cozy with big tech, where they're fully monetized, their views are permissible, and people like Nick Fuentes, they're deplatformed. I'm at Rumble. I obviously would have pull at Rumble. I've been there for a long time. I have been painstakingly clear. Nick Fuentes, of course, should have a platform if he's not breaking the law. That's the difference between some of the old school conservatives who say free speech, but behind the scenes they glad hand a little bit. And if these people are radical, and I don't know that they are, that's why I'd like to have a conversation with them. We do need to ask what radicalized them. That's a valid, if we believe that they're radical. But I think they have some legitimate grievances. And you have one side saying, these people are despicable, these people are offensive. Those are victim bitch words. Don't use those words. And then you have people trolling saying, I love Stalin. I don't think that anyone who's right-wing or conservative loves Stalin, but I'd like to follow up. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, you know, I agree with a lot of what you just said. Is Donald Trump betraying his campaign promise to make America great in the way he said he would? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene ticked off a number of things. You've had some issues yourself, clearly. Is he betraying MAGA, do you think?
Well, I don't think he's betraying. I think he's made some missteps, and I wonder who's in his ear. Again, which Marjorie Taylor Greene am I dealing with? Tucker
Right.
Carlson? Well, which Tucker am I talking to? Am I talking to crossfire, bow tie, libertarian, legalized black tar heroin Tucker? Or am I talking to Tucker Carlson who dresses like Curious George goes fly fishing Mr. Populist? I don't know. These people have taken both sides on every issue. I do think that the Chinese exchange student, or sorry, not exchange student, 600,000, that's a mistake. H-1Bs. I don't want to see a bunch of people replacing Americans at lower wages, certainly not when the bulk of them are coming from India, because I don't want us to look like India #2. And I think the problem that we've seen, too, is you have one side who said that race has nothing to do with it, and then you have people saying race has everything to do with it. These people are wrong. Race and culture and the country, especially when you're dealing with a country of origin, when you're dealing with third world slave wage labor, it is relevant. It's a conversation that needs to be had. And when you silence it, you pique that curiosity gap. I think Trump is wrong on that. I also, again, my issue is a lot of people who are pissed off about it now, we're all in on Elon. I always said Elon has done some great stuff. Buying Twitter, turning it to X, that's great. He's always had the policy of uncapping H-1Bs. That's not America first. I'm just wondering why it's an issue now, and with Marjorie Taylor Greene, when only a week ago she was saying we can't deport people because of my construction company. Which one am I talking to? That does matter. People can change their minds. But going back and forth in the span of a week and then refusing to have the conversations with people who will legitimately test them, that's always concerning to me. And like I've said, the invitation has been extended to everyone. So far, no takers. I'm basic bitch, pumpkin spice latte conservative, really. It's not that extreme.
Who is the next standard bearer for the Republican Party, do you think, in America?
Well, obviously the natural sequence would be J.D. Vance, and I think he's been very impressive as of late. I think you still have people like DeSantis waiting in the wings. You know, Charles Krauthammer, when I was at Fox News, he was there. And I've always said if Charles Krauthammer, one of the most brilliant political minds of our time, if he was only right 50% of the time, me on the couch with a bag of potato chips don't really have a shot. But I think anyone who places the needs of Americans first, and that doesn't mean, by the way, that we have to follow lockstep, but I do think Israel is a legitimate issue where people have legitimate grievances. I don't think that Israel's security is tied to that of the United States. That being said, we should defund all of it, right? And people in the comments, let me know if this is reasonable. Defund all of it, but I would personally have no problem if the IDF gave every member of Hamas a dynamite suppository. Because I believe that Islam, radical Islam, is a far greater threat to the West and Christian civilization than Israel. Doesn't mean that either one of them are perfect, are angels. I think people like J.D. Vance, people who've made it clear that they'll place the needs and the wants of the American people first, I think anyone who is in that vein probably has a shot. And as a matter of fact, I don't even think it's an option anymore. I don't even think it's an option for someone like a Jeb Bush or someone saying, you know what, we really, really need to be strong allies with Israel. I just think that's kind of out the window, and that's not anti-Semitic. I think it's a legitimate conversation that needed to be had, and I'm okay with it. I just would like to have it with everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was having this conversation with Benny earlier. It's like the idea if you criticize a country's government, somehow that means you hate that country's people, is such a facile argument. You know, it's
right.
It's not anti-Semitic to think a lot of what the Israeli government's been doing in the last year, especially, has been misguided and probably self-harming and made life more difficult for Jewish people around the world, actually, is what I think about what's happened. It doesn't mean I don't support Israel's right to defend itself from terrorists. I did and continue to support that right. It's how you do that is open to legitimate, exactly the same way I had the problem with my government and the American government over Iraq back in 2003. I was not satisfied that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction or had anything to do with 9/11. A lot of people felt he was made the scapegoat for what happened there. Doesn't mean he wasn't a bad guy. He was a bad guy, but it had nothing to do with 9/11. And that war, in my view, should never have happened. And the damage was consequential afterwards. But again, the idea that I could oppose my government doing that and hate the British people, ridiculous. Or hate the American people because of something the American government's done under any administration. It is such a facile argument, and yet it's being used quite deliberately by many on the pro-Israeli side to silence legitimate debate.
Right. No, I figure I'd also find it funny that you said you were not satisfied with the war in Iraq, like you got a lukewarm DoorDash order. I think it's quite a bit worse than that. By the way, I just got a rock in my pad thai last night, a rock with my Uber Eats. So just look for those. That actually happened. I chipped a tooth. There's not even thanks AI, there's not even a box to check for that. But no, I agree with you. And I would say this is a controversial position. The reason that it can't work is because there's no reasoning with most of these, and by these people I mean Islamists. Once Muslim reach a majority of a country where they get control of the government, we see it revert to something horrible as far as human rights. Keep in mind, there are about 200 million Muslims on Earth right now, according to Pew Research, who believe that violence is often, or at least somewhat acceptable, against apostates, against infidels. So for people to not acknowledge that means that it'll dictate your approach to international policy. And I still believe that Islamic encroachment and their prescription is a threat to the West. All of these are legitimate conversations. Now, I also know this. There are also behind-the-scenes targeted harassment campaigns that go on. That's probably why you were afraid to have Nick Fuentes on. Or not afraid, hesitant to have Nick Fuentes on.
Oh, no,
because,
I don't care about
people...
that at all.
Okay.
No.
Well, people get doxxed, people get swatted, and that's not Nick's fault. That's the fault of the audience. And I can tell you this, he would send the Groyper army out a long time ago to pursue Charlie Kirk, to pursue Ben Shapiro, and dictate the Q&A sessions and make it all about the Jews. So people felt like he wasn't acting in good faith. But if he was genuinely pushed to the corner by people like Ben Shapiro and folks at the Daily Wire saying, YouTube, you have to deplatform this guy, he has a legitimate grievance, and you're going to radicalize that person. Here's where we are now. Do we have these conversations? Do we acknowledge that the left is out there, that they just killed one of our friends and they would kill any one of us if given the chance? And that doesn't mean everyone who votes Democrat. That means those in charge of the leftist coalition. Yes. Do we want a future for this country? Conservatism now, or right wing, doesn't just mean conservative values or principles. It means conserving this country. And that means conserving this country from both internal threats and external threats. And you can expand that to mean mass immigration from countries that don't share our values, that will make us feel like strangers in our own hometowns. That's the legitimate grievance that you see from these people, and silencing them isn't going to make it go away. And I don't even agree with them on a whole lot of these issues.
Right.
But as far as Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'd have her on too. Again, I don't know what her position is.
Yeah, what's really ironic about this is that the Democrats are polling at record lows and clearly have clearly have no idea which way to turn. Their sort of new superstar is basically a brazen socialist, if not a communist, in Mamdani, and you just think they don't know what they're doing. And right at that moment, you see the right beginning to splinter, when actually if they could reach the kind of coherent unity that you're talking about, you got to think there's a very good chance they win the next election too, but not if they're broken in two, which is the way some people seem to want to take it. It's a very odd piece of timing, given how vulnerable the other team is.
No, you're absolutely right. To sort of distill it, the left is like, hey, and you can bleep this. We want chicks with dicks medaling at the Olympics. We want them on the podium. We want kids transitioning. We want never-ending funding for Snap, where you have $9 billion a year being spent on Coca-Cola. Over 60% of these people have no business being on Snap. If you can't cut Fanta from Snap, you can't cut anything. They are lowest ever, like you said, in their polling. And then people on the right going, you must be paid by the Jews to point that out. Or you must be paid by Qatar. It's like, are we adults? Let's all have this conversation. But I do, again, my big issue is the facade of anyone, anytime, as far as debate and conversation, but they don't live it. They don't follow it. So I'd like to hear one name come out of their mouth, and that's mine, and I would welcome them and respectfully host them, but I don't know why that doesn't happen. I know that they'll go on sometimes shows that give them softballs. I cannot imagine a world in which any guest, if it was you, Pierce, and you said, I love Stalin, I would go, wait a second, Pierce, let's explore that, right? Like maybe I'm your therapist or something. That's pretty interesting. You know, he killed a whole lot of people. I just wonder where the curiosity went at the time when we should be winning. And yes, Donald Trump has stepped on a few rakes. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know who's in his ear. But here's the one thing, too, I really want to drive home. We have something with President Trump that we've never had. And that's a feedback mechanism, right? Kind of like I was talking about DoorDash earlier. President Trump listens. Meaning the conservative side can voice their opposition to his policies, and he will adapt. Yeah. And instead, we're focused on flinging shit at each other.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's fascinating. Stephen Crowder, great to have you back on Sense. Thank you very much.
Bring me in when you're president of the BBC. Thank you, sir.
Well, joining me now is Matt Schlapp, the chairman of S.P.A.Z. Welcome to you, Matt. I mean, I've had some fascinating conversations with Benny Johnson, with Stephen Crowder, and with others about where the conservative right is going. You're right in the middle of all this. What do you feel is happening?
Feel. Interesting word that a conservative doesn't really ponder very much. I'll be honest with you, my feelings are fraught. I'm anxious. I don't like these public squabbles. I'm looking at the Democratic Party embracing Marxism in completely crazy public policy and candidates, and I think the Democrats that I know in Washington, D.C. are really worried about what's going on with their party, but yet publicly, it seems like the focus is on these splits in this Trump coalition. And, you know, in candor, I am very worried about the splits.
How much of that has been self-induced? And I would give it as an example the Epstein files and the way it's been handled. You know, I mean, whatever emerges from these files, there's no doubt that the Trump administration, before the election and in the immediate aftermath, were encouraging everyone that they were going to release everything fully transparent and so on, and then suddenly the shutters come down. Now it looks like they've been forced into doing a U-turn, and now we're going to have the files released and so on. That has enraged a lot of people on the MAGA right. They really feel let down by that. So I think there have been things the Trump administration's done where their own team feel let down by it.
It's just hard for me to fathom, Pierce, because I'm old. I'm a couple of years, I'll be 60 years old. I got white hair. I've been doing this my whole life. The conservative movement has never, and I say never in my lifetime, and I love Ronald Reagan and I worked for President Bush, has never had a president who was willing to go everywhere on everything and make all the right people really upset. I always say all the right people are sweating in Washington. It's a great, glorious thing to behold, and it's been going on for a year. Now, within the course of that year, believe it or not, I'm a cheerleader for President Trump because he's earned it, but there are things I disagree with. There are times that I would do things differently than him. But after this near decade of him being this champion on all the policies that I care about, am I going to look for the needle in the haystack thing to be upset with him about? That's the mentality I can't quite understand. I understand that for a politician or for someone in the media, you know, you're looking for attention, you're looking for hits, and there's no better way to get more attention, I suppose, than saying Donald Trump is letting us down. But, like, logically, how could that really even be a theme? I can't think of a policy area where, Ted Williams is, for Americans, Pierce, Ted Williams is like the greatest baseball slugger of all times. That was 400. What is Donald Trump batting? 900? And that's not good enough? I can't quite understand.
I guess what his critics would say, they'd say, look, this is somebody who pledged not to engage in any more foreign wars, but has committed more funding to Ukraine in their war against Russia, has committed endless funding to Israel in the war against Hamas, bombed Iran, is now threatening military attack on Venezuela. They think that's inconsistent. They look at the inflation situation a year in, and they say a lot of food prices and so on are higher than they were at the start of the year. They feel let down by that. Epstein files went from transparency to no transparency to now potentially transparency. So there are a few things there where I can understand why critics have looked at that and gone, well, they said one thing and have done another. Notwithstanding, there are many other things that Trump has done, which are, in my view, not only successful, but haven't got the credit that they deserve, like, pretty well closing the southern border after the porous nature of that border in the Biden administration and so on. So there are many things I think you can say Trump has done a good job, but there are other things where I can see why people are constructing an argument, particularly some of the MAGA base, where they say that's not what we voted for.
So I would say the southern border is most prominent and cheap, and it's also the one area where Joe Biden was so irresponsible because it was in Joe Biden's hands to open or close that border. He opened it wide up and let millions and millions and millions of people into my country. And so Donald Trump has great legal authority to close that border, and he's done a masterful job, and Kristi Noem and Tom Homan and the whole team. Now, when it comes to bringing peace to Europe or to the Middle East, much more tricky question, right? You're trying to figure out a way to weave and get it done. And I think the president has done a great job in ending wars all over the globe. These are two incredibly tricky problems. When it comes to Ukraine, I think the real question is he's making Europe pay for it. He's making Europe start to donate to NATO according to the treaties that they've signed. I mean, this is part of the Trump doctrine, which is, if I'm to say it in a more guttural sense, is America's not going to be the world's sucker anymore. We're not going to pay all the bills. It's not our young men and women in uniform who are going to trudge all around the world and do the job of other countries. That being said, America's the most important superpower, and we're in a hell of a battle with China, and we must win that battle. Starts with technology, and Donald Trump understands that. He wants America to be big and feared. He never said he wasn't going to use the military. He just simply said that, much like Ronald Reagan, we want you to fear us and fear our military. And there'll be times when it's used, but we're not looking to go to war with everybody we hate. Matter of fact, President Trump has told me, and he's told others, he likes the fact that some of these dictators and evil guys overseas feel like Trump might be crazy or trigger happy, because maybe it'll make them realize that America's serious when they say they're going to defend these things. And I have to say, on the whole Hamas thing, Pierce, I just don't get it. I mean, the radicalized Muslims are bent on the destruction of Israel and America. Who's the big Satan? Who's the second biggest Satan? It doesn't really matter to me. It's just that is their cause, and we could be naive and act like that's not the case. I think that would be a very irresponsible thing to do.
Would you host Nick Fuentes at CPAC?
You know, not only have we not hosted him, we've kicked him out of CPAC.
Yeah.
He's, year after year tried to use CPAC as a bit of a publicity stunt, and we want nothing to do with it. That being said, I like this, what I hear from some of my colleagues, that, we're not the people that shut people down and say,
well, that's
you're not
why I
allowed
asked
to
the
speak.
question, really, is that as his influence is clearly rising, and as he's getting talked about more and more,
Right.
and is part of the debate, does the argument to not allow him a platform start to get reduced? I mean, is there a potential hypocrisy of people on the right who for years have been, quite rightly, railing against what they see as the woke
Right.
ideology tendency to cancel culture, deplatforming, and so on, everybody on the right they didn't like? Is there a danger that by suppressing somebody like Fuentes, the right start behaving in the same way?
We look at all these questions every year. We have our big conference every year, and then we have other events, and we're always asking ourselves that question. I mean, I've had Van Jones and some really far left people on the stage, but they weren't on because they were left wingers. They were on because we were working together on some public policy. If somebody who's a provocateur online actually got serious and wanted to work on some kind of public policy, I mean, I think I take a meeting with almost anybody to discuss almost anything. But there are lines that are crossed, right? And my feeling is, when it comes to questions of bigotry and hatred, that it's fair to say, you know what, we're not going there this year. Doesn't mean that they don't have the right to speak. I don't really have that much power in the scheme of things. We're not a big media company. I'm not saying they should be canceled. I'm not saying they should never get a job. I don't want their family to be harmed. But does their message really fit into the CPAC message? I think it's a very fair question for us to ask. And when it comes to Nick Fuentes, we don't feel like there's been enough harmony to be able to have him on stage. And I will say specifically, I don't understand the animosity. If you're not an anti-Semite, why so much animosity towards Israel? I mean, there doesn't seem to be this animosity towards other countries that we have substantial disagreements with, or some minor disagreements. So it's a very fair challenge for people to say, is it just a strategic question, or do you have a problem with there being a Jewish state? I don't have a problem with there being a Jewish state. It's a bit of a unique thing, obviously, but I don't have a problem with that, because we tried it the other way, and the pogroms and the persecution, are diabolical and historic. And, the civilization at the time and the countries at that time said, we have to give the Jewish people their own state. And for whatever reason, I see it woven in the Bible, but there's other reasons as well. The Jewish state views America as its most important strategic ally. And I think that is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think, for example, somebody like me who supported Israel's right to defend itself after October the 7th, but then became increasingly critical of the way that Israel was prosecuting the war against Hamas. I don't understand why that means I suddenly become anti-Semitic. I wasn't accused of being anti-Semitic when I supported Israel's right to defend itself. And I do think that has been an ugly side of the debate on that particular war. You should be free to criticize governments and their decisions without being branded as somebody who hates the people of that country.
Well, first of all, you would be very welcome on the S.P.A.Z stage, Pierce. And I think that one of the things we have to do as we get closer to our big conference is thinking about a way to talk about this in a constructive manner. I think Stephen, I heard a bit of that conversation, and I think it is true, which is you have a lot of young men who feel very unattached to success in America. They don't feel like they're treated in the same legal way, that there's a two-tiered system of justice, and they're increasingly following more strident voices. And I think one of the things we ought to do is, instead of calling each other names, I don't know what that accomplishes. And by the way, I'm not the guy who gets to determine who's anti-Semitic or not. I mean, I can have my own opinions, but I think what you just said, if you have a real disagreement with Prime Minister Netanyahu, or you have a real disagreement with Israeli public policy, and you express that publicly, you have every right to do that. And I think disagreeing with the leaders of Israel, I don't think that makes you anti-Semitic. I think when you get into the range where people start to hurl that invective is when you seem to just have a hostility towards Israel, right? Or when you're always against them on everything, or you talk about your hatred for their policy constantly. And I think when it comes to October 7th, the only thing I will say is that that was a historically evil, malign attack. I went to the strip near the Gaza Strip with some of the survivors of the attack, and I watched all these videos that have been pulled together. And we can't kind of sugarcoat the fact that there is a radicalized Muslim effort to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and they have to live with that reality. And I think as Americans, we have to understand we have to live with that reality too, because they want to wipe us off the face of the earth. Now, having said that, there still have to be protocols and a humanitarian approach to how you handle that conflict. And I worked for President Bush. One of the things that we decided to do is that we would wipe them from the face of the earth. And I think looking back on it all these many years ago, we were a little too cocky with that approach. And I think it should remind all of us that there's a humility to the idea that, yeah, you want to stand up and defend America, but can we use our military to just indiscriminately take people in and out of power, set up governments and regimes? And with the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan of Joe Biden, that's just it's such a black mark on our history that we didn't use our military in a way that Ronald Reagan, I think, would have been proud of, which was to use it sparingly, to be humble with it. When we use it ferociously, but we can't get ourselves into these never-ending conflicts. And I think that is where I think the people who are criticizing our close association with Israel, they're afraid we're going to start fighting their wars for them. I think it's a misnomer. I think it's a false charge. I think Israel has to fight its wars, and I think Israel has done one hell of a job of executing on those wars.
That's right. Great to have you back on Uncensored. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierce.
Well, my next guest has found himself at the sharp end of the contrasting views of what America First means and what MAGA represents, for his views on the apparent collapse in the MAGA coalition. I'm joined by Texas Congressman and former U.S. Navy SEAL Dan Crenshaw. Dan, welcome back to Uncensored. Good to see you. What is going on with the MAGA movement? Is it fragmenting irrevocably? Are you seeing Ben Shapiro and the likes of Ben on one side, splitting the whole MAGA thing in two in a way it can never be repaired?
I think that's giving one side way too much credit. I mean, there's a lot of adults talking in the room, and there's a toddler or two screaming in the corner, begging for attention. That's really what this split is. I mean, look, it appears you know that I've been